So apparently the US government has had its credit rating downgraded by Moody's. Is this a big deal? Should we all start panicking? Or is it a big nothing burger? Well, I did a little bit of deep diving into this specific topic, and I have my own opinion, as you'll determine as we go through this video. So we have this article here from Moody's rating, where they downgrade the United States to AA1 from a triple A rating. And I love the fact that they don't capitalize all of the A's. That would look more professional, Moody's, okay? You should probably take notice of that, okay? So Moody's claims that they have downgraded the government of the United States of America's long-term issuer and senior unsecured ratings to AA1 from AAA and changed the outlook to stable from negative. So what does this rating mean? Well, I pulled up their little rating terms. A triple A rating are obligations rated that are judged to be of the highest quality with minimal risk. And then right below that is AA, which are judged to be of high quality and are subject to very low credit risk. So we went from minimal risk to low risk. Now, the one that is put on the end of it is a modifier. The modifier 1 indicates that the obligation ranks in the higher end of its generic category rating. So what that means is the downgrade was literally one tiny infinitesimal, can't even freaking say the word, infinitesimal step. It went from the highest of the high of the high of the high of the high, just a slightly down, but it's still at the top of the next rating. Okay, we're not looking at like, oh my God, we're about to default here. Just saying. Let's read a little bit more. This one-notch downgrade reflects the increase over more than a decade in government debt and interest payment ratios to levels that are significantly higher than similarly rated sovereigns. U.S. debt as a percentage of GDP is at the levels of World War II. That is a fact. We expect larger deficits as entitlement spending rises while government revenue remains broadly flat. Entitlements are Social Security, Medicare, government benefits, etc., which are not things that Doge, the government, is trying to cut. As a matter of fact, Trump said he would not cut those. Those are the big problem because we have a huge boomer generation that didn't have a lot of children. And all those boomers are starting to retire. And I can confirm this because my parents are boomers and they're starting to draw Social Security. Okay? And they're going to be enrolled in Medicare. That all costs money. And you know who pays that? The current workers. And as more and more people retire, there's going to be more and more pressure on the Social Security Administration, the Social Security Trust Fund, and the Medicare and Medicaid program, specifically Medicare for older people. So this is something that we're going to have to face, and we're going to have to do some kind of reforms. I'm sure we could raise taxes, or we could do means testing where, you know, really rich people don't get Social Security. There's solutions, right? But so far, we're not even talking about solving the big problems. We're only talking about cutting USAID or like these stupid clownish programs that really don't matter in the big picture. The U.S. retains exceptional credit strength, such as the size, resilience, and dynamism of its economy, and the role of the U.S. dollar as global reserve currency. That's the big one there. We expect that the U.S. will continue its long history of very effective monetary policy led by an independent Federal Reserve. Yes, I believe the Fed has done a fantastic job. Okay, we had a huge inflation spikes of supply shocks and all the crap that happened with the pandemic and all the money that we showered on the nation. But they did a good job of raising interest rates to bring down inflation. We're actually at a point where if we didn't have the tariffs up, guess what? We could probably already have had rate cuts. Just saying. The risk is with the tariffs. So let's read a little bit more. A little bit more details here. Very interesting stuff. We expect budget flexibility to remain limited, with mandatory spending, including interest expense, projected to rise to about 78% of total spending by 2035, from about 73% in 2024. The part that they want to cut out is the discretionary spending. It's like, the military, like NASA. Please cut NASA. and that kind of stuff. That's all discretionary spending. Mandatory spending are the big items. They're basically permanent laws that are required to constantly spend money, Social Security, Medicare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is the vast majority of the U.S. government spending, and we aren't addressing that at all. And those mandatory spending items are going to be a bigger percentage of the government spending going into the future. And if we don't address them now, it's only going to crowd out more and more and more of the discretionary budget. So I suspect the things that we're going to cut first are going to be probably the smaller, executive branch programs and executive branch agencies before we even address Social Security. I think it's going to have to be some kind of like crisis or catastrophe before we even consider touching Social Security. I don't think it's coming for a while. If the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is extended and they're actually trying to improve it by having more tax cuts, I covered that in another video, which is our base case, it will add about $4 trillion to the federal fiscal primary, excluding interest payments deficit over the next decade. So Doge saved $170 billion so far, and now we're saying that we're going to be spending, our deficit's going to increase by $400 billion a year because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act's extension. But I don't even know if they factored in the additional tax cuts, because there's actually deeper tax cuts in this proposed bill that go beyond the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that are going to put even more pressure on deficits. As a result, we expect federal deficits to widen, reaching nearly 9% of GDP by 2035. And we're not even in like a war. Okay, we're not even in a crisis. We're just running massive deficits. Usually a deficit is when you're in crisis, like a lockdown, like a global lockdown because of a pandemic or a war. There's no major war going on. There's no crisis going on. But deficits continue to widen to 9% of GDP. Up from 6.4% in 2024. And remember, I think Besant said that he wanted to get the deficit down to 3% of GDP. So Moody's is saying it's going to get up to 9% of GDP in 2035. And the wider the deficit each year, the more and more and more you're stacking on the current debt. And then you have that vicious cycle of interest expense, compounding interest. Not good, okay? And that's going to be driven by increased interest expense, rising entitlement spending, and relatively low revenue generation because we're cutting taxes. We anticipate the federal debt burden will rise to about 134% of GDP by 2035 compared to 98% in 2024. So I think that 98% is excluding intergovernmental debt because government agencies actually owe each other money. Like Social Security basically lent, the Social Security Trust Fund basically lent money to the federal government. All the money that's sitting in trust is actually like IOUs to the federal government. So if you exclude intergovernmental debt, that's how you get to the 98%. But total debt is actually bigger than the economy right now. I think it's like 120%. So be careful with the numbers. They're saying the federal burden, excluding intergovernmental debt, the government owes to itself, which is real debt because we're going to be drawing from the Social Security Trust Fund to pay beneficiaries, is going to be 134%. But if you include intergovernmental debt, it's going to be higher than that. Okay, so we're rapidly approaching like Japan levels of government debt. Federal interest payments are likely to absorb about 30% of revenue by 2035. 30% of revenue. Oh, my treasuries are going to print. Up from 18% in 2024 and 9% in 2021. So we went from 9% in 2021 to 18% in 2024 to 30% in 2035. The numbers aren't looking very good here. Okay, what's it going to be in 2045, 2065? Oh my God. But funny enough, they say while GDP growth is likely to slow in the short term as the economy adjusts to higher tariffs, we do not expect that the U.S.'s long-term growth will be significantly affected. So basically nothing stops U.S. stocks, bro. Okay. In addition, the U.S. dollar status as the world's dominant reserve currency provides significant credit support to the sovereign. Yes, the only reason we can do this is because we are the world's reserve currency. There's a demand for our currency around the freaking globe, okay? Unless Trump can mess that up. So this is not an imminent train wreck, but you can already see, like, this is a long festering problem that at some point in the future, we don't know when, is going to lead to a massive crisis. It could be 15 years from now. It could be 2 years from now. I don't freaking know. Okay? But it's obviously unsustainable. Especially, this should be the most concerning thing right here. Federal interest payments are likely to absorb about 30% of revenue. Holy freaking crap, dude. So they have here factors that could lead to an upgrade or downgrade of the rating. So they say the implementation of fiscal reforms to significantly slow and eventually reverse the deterioration in debt affordability and fiscal deficits, either by increasing government revenues, tax increases, not going to happen, or reducing spending, probably not going to happen, could lead to an upgrade. So I don't think we're going to go back to an upgrade. A significantly faster and larger deterioration in fiscal metrics that we currently expect could weigh on the rating. A rapid move out of dollar assets by global investors, didn't we kind of see a little bit of that? Could precipitate such a deterioration if it resulted in much higher interest rates, causing the interest burden to rise faster than we currently expect. It's more likely than you might think, okay? We do not consider this to be a likely scenario since a credible alternative to the US dollar as global reserve currency is not readily apparent. But that's the thing. These things can change on a dime. There's always the assumption that, it's the US dollar is a reserve currency, and that's not going to change because I don't see anything right now. But if the entire world decided to move away from the dollar, they all got together because they were tired of all the nonsense that the US is doing, trust me, they could find a solution. Okay. The rating could also be downgraded if policy effectiveness or the strength of institutions were to erode to such a degree that materially weakens the sovereign's credit profile. This would be the case if it were to lead to a deterioration in medium-term growth or economic resilience to shocks, or if it was accompanied by a significant and lasting move by global investors out of the US dollar. So there is the potential for future downgrades if we see current trends continuing. But overall, what Moody's is saying is that they slightly reduced the government's risk of default from, let me get the exact terms, minimal to very low, okay? So right now, we're not in crisis mode. Even I agree with that. But what I don't personally see are like legitimate attempts to address government deficits. We're trying to expand them with tax cuts and the failure of Doge. So let me know what you think. Is this a nothing burger? Is this a big deal? I guess the market didn't seem to care. I mean, if they had dropped it down to a C3, that would be catastrophic. But going from AAA to AA1, we're a long way from U.S. debt becoming junk debt. So calm down. It's going to be okay for now, everybody. Okay? Take a breath. Check out the pinned comment. I offer a variety of services, tax preparation, bookkeeping, sponsored videos, all sorts of great stuff. It's all in the pinned comment below. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Don't be a panican, and have a wonderful night.